Welcome to Chasing the Beats, a show dedicated to weeklybeats.com artists, their songs, and stories from the 2024 season. I'm your host, SQF, and our guest today is onezero. All right, welcome onezero, aka Maurice.
Hello. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man.
Am I audible? I think I'm pretty low.
It'll do some correction post processing. So I think
great.
good. I look a little loud, actually. Well, I'm stoked to have you on the show. If people are not familiar with your works, you, I think, are the most prolific music creator that I've had on here yet. You've been making a song a week at least since 2014. Is that right? And then we'll dive into your other side projects and everything. But I'm just very interested in meeting someone or getting to talk about that experience. Like, that's huge.
Yeah. I mean, we can just start diving in because it's definitely given a shape to my creative work, since I started. I mean, the story there, maybe I just wind back to end of 2013. I had been working. I've been working in tech startups, and it was at that point like 6 months into another startup job, and I was thinking, I haven't done a lot of playing out. I haven't done a lot of, and I had been performing a lot, say 10 years before that. Like 2003 was a very busy year, like including a tour and some other stuff. I was doing shows fairly consistently, but when job stuff was getting more intense, I took a step back from a lot of performing and scrambling to get shows or things like that. And my kids were like, I had a family by that point. Like I didn't in 2003, or I didn't have kids in 2003. So then it was like, okay, focus on how the family's doing, focus on the job, and what time and attention do I have left over for music. I didn't feel like I was moved to compose a lot. It just seemed like, you reach the end of the day and it's, just gotta punch out. But we took a little break to visit some other family outside of town, and I was looking, as I would typically do, once a day, look at Peter Kern's Create Digital Music site, and he had a link to this project, Weekly Beats, and I was, what's that? And read about how people are doing a commitment to do a composition every week, and I thought, I don't have a project in mind. I'm not like trying to complete an album.
Yeah.
I don't have songs that are just bursting out, but I can like sit there for a few hours a week and do something. And so this was like right before 2014 started, so I had like some lead time to get into it, and started. And the first few were kind of not all that good. It was just here's something I did in MIDI instruments in live, or I did some MIDI instruments and slapped a guitar on it, and well, there it is. And then, I mean, I don't know, I wouldn't say like a month or so in, I like had an idea for something that kind of like, that's an interesting idea. It was like a fake fall track. And so it's like, well, that was kind of cool. That worked out nicely. And then
you were like getting in the rhythm of like making things.
Yeah, it's like, well, because if you're doing a piece, every week, sit down, it's like, well, do I have an idea? No, I don't have an idea. Well, let's see. Well, what could I do? Well, let's see. What if I did something like this? What if I, approached it this way? What if I did a rock song? What if I did a, something very low key and vibey or something? It just changing things up a little bit. and I reached some that I wanted to listen to again, or I wanted to play in the car during the commute or
Yeah.
something. So, oh, how did I do this week? What was it? Does this? What did I like? What did I not like?
Mhm.
And I came eventually to a point of thinking, well, I can try stuff. It's if I if I am really completely, if there's nothing at all in the tank this week, and I come up with something and it's not all that good, who is harmed? Nobody.
Exactly.
There's essentially no cost to trying stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And if it is bad, it's like, well, I got another one coming this week. We'll just do something else.
Yeah, when you
And
get to that point in the weekly beats year where you're like, screw it, I'm just gonna try some stuff.
yeah, I was listening back through some in prep for our conversation, and I was thinking, like some of these, I'm like, okay, that's a lengthy experiment. This one, or this one could be about a third the length, or whatever.
Yeah.
There's like one idea here, and I stretched it out. But some of them were like, oh, well, the first half of this is pretty good. It's just the back half is not so good. But I mean, there's it, throughout the years, those kind of expanding out through things and trying different stuff. And it was kind of a journey of discovery. There's been some consistent trends that I've noticed, which is, for example, one of the pieces we're going to look at. I think, let me actually open that live set so I can count this, which is this one is, so looking at one from the end of 2016. Sorry, Ableton has to launch, but
No problem.
there were a lot of tracks. There were, let's see, this one in particular is, we've got some drama, some anticipation, but
Drum roll, please.
I had like two drums on there, like two instances of drum rack, maybe three, two synths, one electric piano, three or four guitars. Let me see.
Like a whole
Yeah,
band.
yeah, a whole band. It was like a larger band. It was okay. 9 tracks of instruments, and that's a lot. I probably wouldn't do that now.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to go back to 2014
Yeah,
still, like your first weekly beats experience, and I'm looking back to my weekly beats year last year, and kind of having this like relief of like, "Ooh, I get to take a little bit of a break." What made you want to just like keep rolling on?
it was kind of an accident in a way, in that I'd reached the end of the year, and during that year I'd had 3-4 pieces that kind of stuck in my mind, like surprised me. And uh, toward the end of the year, there was this little glitch that showed the site ready to take another full year of submissions. And I thought, oh, doing it again for
Okay.
2015, and then and then they corrected that, and so it was back to showing the full, all the weeks, filled. And I felt like, man, I'm kind of disappointed. So I thought, you know, it's giving shape to my week in a way. It's giving me something to do creatively. I'm I'm not ending the week with nothing.
Mhm.
And whether I put something out or collect it or release it, or even tell anybody about it, whether anyone listens or not, I
Right.
did a thing and maybe I learned from it. So I thought, well, let's just maybe I'll just keep going on SoundCloud. So I did. I ended up filling my SoundCloud account for 2015 with 52 pieces,
Nice.
and some of those weren't bad. Those were some of them had a thing to them. They stuck in
Mhm.
a way, uh, and so a lot of them were a mix of, there's a mix of like electronic kind of stuff, some dub, some funk, some dance related stuff. I was doing a little bit more with a local community that was involved in electronic production. So there was a lot of attention toward how does your kick drum sound and stuff like that.
Right.
And getting the making sure that the frequency bands of the kick and are not interfering with the bass and things like that.
Right.
And that was very very useful lesson to focus on. So doing it through 2015 also gave me new stuff to take to these monthly meetings. So it was just kind of a continual slow path of growth.
And we talk a lot about the community aspect of Weekly Beats. How was that in 2014?
2014, I did get some interaction from people. Got some some positive comments. Got some not so positive comments. It seemed as though 2014 started trending toward like the people who sort of like to stir things up. They kind of fell off, and so we had more more generally constructive comments. I was more of a busy commenter in 2014 and 2016 than later. I haven't admittedly commented as much in recent times for practical reasons. I'd like to go back.
It's its own challenge.
It is.
Yeah.
It's difficult. It's difficult for me to like say roll into Monday morning and get work done and put on Weekly Beats because I'm thinking like, oh, what would I advise this person or what do I like about this? What does this remind me of? I was early on. I would comment a lot of like with production notes. So I can hear you doing this. Like if I could hear where someone could maybe benefit from, like maybe look at how you're mixing this. Like if it's very very quiet, then maybe there's some really low sub bass that's just chewing up a whole bunch of the sonic spectrum, and then you compress it and everything else gets flat. But so like things that I would notice, I could comment on and be helpful.
It's hard to be in listening and commenting mode at the same time, or like passive listening while you're working and be ready to like comment on something.
Yeah, I mean, I like to bring my full attention to it.
Yeah.
And that's instructive for me and for other people as well, potentially. But it's so I did end up missing that in 2015 because nobody, one or two people might make comments on SoundCloud. There's less in the way of commentary. But it was, it was nice to go back into 2016 and here's the community again. And people were saying, and I recognize this person, I recognize that person.
So the first year you kind of spent a lot of time just experimenting, sort of figuring out like the rhythm of making music every week, and liked it, and then kept going in 2015. How since you've done this so many times now, on and off Weekly Beats years, have you noticed any overall trends of learnings or like just getting the reps in? Like what is it like if you could go back to like 2014 year, like this is what I've learned in all of this time?
Yeah, I think that there's a number of different things. I've noticed the trend of I'm using way less tracks. There's and we can get to a pivot point in a little bit where I'm down to like
so many jumping off points.
Yeah. So I kind of want to use chronology as a working.
Yeah.
So it's there were once I'd done the first year, I felt a certain amount of just because of the way the community is, I felt a general safety around being able to try stuff. So that, like for example, in 2016, a friend of mine, I was talking to this friend who was not on Weekly Beats, said, I want to hear you make a track using just cowbell. And and so I'm like, let's do that this week.
Yeah.
And I did not send you the link to that, but let me find that because it might be worth dropping in for a few seconds. It's so I ended up, I don't recall how many tracks I did. Maybe it was an 8-track one, but I found a bunch of cowbell samples,
Yeah,
and arranged them in a MIDI instrument, and just sort of built up this like drumline concept that it just like a sort of marching band of cowbells, like from regular sized cowbells on up to like refrigerator sized cowbells, because the if I did it that way, I could get a full arrangement of like, bass, baritone, alto,
mm-hmm.
that kind of thing.
So
And
you felt safe with the community
yeah, I mean,
to.
it was like it was a little silly, but I also wanted to make it like cool. So I
Yeah,
put this one. I'll drop the beat in, or I'll drop this in. Drop the
cool.
link in the in Discord.
All right, I'm gonna cue it up
So
here.
that might be a place to start with a music example. Oh, mixing up time signatures there too.
All right, here's the a little sample of the cowbell one. That's pretty sweet.
Thank you. Yep, wanted to make it groove.
It grooves.
I think my favorite part is that refrigerator-sized cowbell.
Well, we'll throw a link in there to listen to the whole thing too.
Yes, I felt a certain safety around doing that. Like I wasn't afraid of looking weird or silly or something. I mean, you could do you do whatever you want for a week. If you
Yeah, so already back in 2016, like you said, the not so nice people had sort of not shown back up, and it was kind of like sounds like the community that I know now.
yeah, it was entirely constructive and open. I think if I look at the comments on that one, I mean, people seem to dig it. They thought it was entertaining. Digging the percussion. A lot of comments on this. So that was a fun one. But the freedom to try things, because as long as it exceeds a minute or whatever the lower cutoff is, exceeds a minute in length. It's why not do it? Why not put it out there?
Yeah, and I imagine some of those experiments took you in completely new directions.
Yeah, there were some that I did that were a lot slower. There were some I want to say 2016 that were completely ambient. Not that I wasn't a stranger to ambient music. I've been doing a number of things live that way. Some were very soundscapey. Some were out of the thought of like, let me just play, let me build a piece that has just E in it. Just the note E.
Some challenges.
Yeah, some challenges. Why not try, something very restrictive? There were some that I did in maybe 2016, 2018 that were, I was playing around. I think this might have been 2016. I was playing around with trying to understand all pass filters a little bit more. So I was building up these all pass filter networks in Max for Live, and doing these sort of weird delay networks in Max for Live that I would combine with sort of extreme. Are you familiar with the Max for Live device Humanizer?
I'm not. I'm not even familiar with Max for Live.
Oh, okay. So in the Ableton world, there's a Ableton Suite, for example, has a bunch of built-in instruments. One of the features that you also get is what's called Max for Live. And Max is a graphical programming language for essentially anything numerical, but also for audio. There's you could do control data and MIDI stuff in like message-based Max, but then there's the Max signal processing, which lets you do essentially live audio stuff. And it was it was invented, I want to say, in the 80s by Miller S. Puckett. He was at Earcom at the time, and he'd come up with a system and left Earcom. And when he got his next position, which I think was at UCSD, he wanted to do something similar, but he wanted to make it open source. So he also invented Pure Data. And those two things are around today. There's, Max was eventually brought out of Earcom and is developed by a company called Cycling 74. And Miller continues to work on Pure Data.
Wow.
But I want to say 2016 was interesting because that was when Cycling 74 was. I don't know exactly how this was done, but around that time, Ableton bought Cycling 74, which is actually great for both companies because there's continuance for Cycling 74, which is this sort of small niche company, and I don't know about their financials, but I know personally I felt a sense of relief. Oh, okay, Max is not going to disappear. This has a path forward. And one of the features of that was for Ableton to include in Ableton Live the ability to make your own Max stuff. And the input output would be, you could think of it as essentially having a graphical language for developing your own VSTs.
Got it.
So I was fiddling with that.
Making weekly Beats tracks with Max for Live?
Well, or involving Max for Live in some way, like doing these. The reason why I was interested in all pass filters was there's are you familiar with Valhalla DSP?
Yes.
Okay. So Sean Costello, the Valhalla guy, he in 2015 gave some talks at the Seattle Audio Engineering Society meetings on the history of reverb, and you can find these. You can find them and listen to them. They're actually quite brilliant. The one is called 1,000 Years of Reverb, and then the next month he came back for another talk where the 1,000 Years of Reverb talks about say starting with stone cathedrals as essentially reverb chambers, right? They were built for that sound.
Mm-hmm.
And you go back to the music created at that time for those places, the reverb is an essential part of things. There's for example, you could look at fast passages in string quartets that may have been written in those times, and they're really kind of meant to simulate chords because things get smeary with this big reverby space. And he takes us up through smaller echo chambers, concert halls, plate reverbs, spring reverbs, and then into early digital stuff. And then the next talk he focused more on the 90s with like the Alesis quadriverb and stuff like that. I'll send you the links. I'll have to dig them up. But there were these really amazing talks, and the quadriverb, which is like the sound of Autechre, that's kind of there's this kind of graininess to it, and it's got this it's got like this really unique digital smear to it, and some of it has to do with the bit depth, and I can't remember if it's 10 or 12, but it's not it's more than 8 bits, but it's not quite 16 quality, so there's a little bit of stair-steppiness.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the quadriverb-ness comes from the use of all pass filters to kind of smear things out and make it not so delay. Like it would be very boingy, like as a slapback kind of thing. But
Got
the
it, to
all
add
pass
some like
filter,
natural elements to it.
yeah, but it's entirely not natural because of how they're simulating it. But it also ends up being a really cool sound. So I was like, oh, I want to kind of get my hands dirty with this and play a bit with the with what the all pass filters are doing. I don't think I really cracked the nature of it for myself, but it was an interesting experiment. I mean, it
Man,
ended
you
up
got me Googling so much stuff over here.
it ended up. I mean, like I crashed live a bunch of times because the plugins that I was building out like had all these filters in them, and I had done it very inefficiently and essentially made the program unusable while I was using it. But it was like education. It was learning
And
it.
does this break off into a slight segue into your live performance stuff?
To some degree, because I was doing I started using Pure Data some years before. And Pure Data was attractive because you could just like download it and it was free. Whereas Max, came with a price tag. And I was playing around with Pure Data. I initially, when I started performing, um, I was doing sort of like guitar through pedals and simultaneously triggering a bunch of manipulated samples with a laptop using a piece of software that a local band had developed for themselves. The band was Operation Reinformation, and they had this piece of software called Back to Basics. So I'd like loaded a bunch of stuff in there, and um, then there was an OS change that made that unusable, unfortunately. so I had to figure out something else, and I ended up using a Max patch that was developed by because Max will let you develop patches that you can run as standalone applications. And this one person developed one that it was like a bunch of delay. You could set up a bunch of delay lines and add some ring modulation and some other stuff. And I was using that for performance for a few years. And then some OS change rendered that impossible
And
to work with.
to kind of catch everyone up, you run, this is another Bandcamp account, SNWV Sine
Yes,
Wave,
yes.
and you've been doing a live stream ambient show every Monday since when?
So since 2020, since March of 2020, when lockdown started.
All right, a
So
lockdown
yeah.
project that kept
Although
going.
the Sine Wave project began earlier in that I was doing I was coming up with patches that would just there were like banks of oscillators, like sine wave oscillators, hence the sine wave thing. The
Yeah,
SNWV, uh, some
that
of
is a
that
sweet Bandcamp name, by the way.
it seemed fairly natural to me. Some of it was also influenced by the band Silkworm, who their T-shirts, of which I have a few, with SKWM.
Yeah,
Sine wave makes some sense. It
perfect.
also made sense to somebody else. Somebody else started a YouTube channel with that name, like years after I'd been active on Bandcamp for years. I then recently found this channel. There's like one song on it, but
And so since 2020, you've been making a song a week and doing a live
yes,
performance on Mondays.
yeah, essentially. There's some weeks I took off for various reasons. I mean, I've kept the song a week commitment.
And with the Sine Wave project, you compile them, each performance, into essentially an album, right?
Yeah, so it's like
And
an
right
album a week
now,
as well as a song a week.
yeah, right now you've got 258 albums, or 257, about to be
Yeah,
258.
I think I'll probably put out the eighth tonight or
Okay, so
tomorrow.
by the time this airs, there'll be
Yeah, but
258.
although if it airs a couple weeks, I might be closing on 260.
All right, so probably close to 260 at this point. Like, That is just astounding to me.
Yeah, it's so in a way this kind of goes back to what said at the beginning, which is the thought of how it may not so much inconceivable or unimaginable, but maybe just looking at where you've finished 52 pieces, and gee, how do you get to 592? Like that's
Keep
it
making
seems
one a
like it seems
week.
like a long road, but I wasn't setting out to do a particular number.
Mm-hmm.
It was more, I want to integrate music into my weekly life. Like
Yeah.
I want to make sure that I continue to engage in regular music making, as opposed to having a plan. And in a way, I think I think it was, there's a story about the photographer Jerry Welsman, uh, who was teaching somewhere. I want to say in Florida. There's like three different versions of this story, but one of them was that he had assigned half of his class to make exactly one photograph that was like the best perfect photograph they could make,
All right.
and
Yeah, I think I've heard this one.
the other half of the class was assigned take as many photos as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And the at the end of the semester, the as many photos as you possibly can side of the class produced better work than the one perfect photo.
It's those reps.
It is about the reps,
Yeah.
and yeah, like if this photo sucks, who cares? I'll do you'll do the next one. It's
So what keeps you going is just knowing that like every week you're going to create something.
going to do something,
Yeah.
and if I'm really busy or distracted, or life is going on, and or we're looking at the world and feeling feeling kind of at sea. What can I do? Well, one thing I can do is I can make something, and maybe it'll be good.
Yeah.
There was a stretch of work that I was doing. Was it 2015, 2016, 20 up through 2018, and like there was this period where I was also doing a lot of like funk related pieces, and some of that was just like kind of psyching myself up, kind of putting that attitude into the music as a keep going sort of
Yeah.
message to myself. And because
Giving yourself a pep talk through
yeah,
music in
yeah,
a
so like
way.
what do I want to hear right now? Well,
Yeah.
it's that's one guiding principle for some pieces.
Yeah. And
Maybe
I'm
some. Oh, go ahead.
well, I'm curious cuz like I feel like I'm still trying to get into the really experimental phase. Like I feel like my first year was just kind of understanding how I make songs, and while also like trying to hit a deadline while still trying to push the boundaries in some ways. And naturally there's like patterns that develop, and just listening through your catalog, which we'll get into more of the listening later, but you definitely have like made like hard turns at certain points. So how do you look back and say like, oh, I really wanted to kind of take this like completely different direction in some cases when I've been doing all this other experimenting, or like I've been kind of in like doing the same thing for a while.
Yeah. There's a kind of there are definitely stretches where I felt like I was treading water, and I was
Okay, so
listening.
that's natural.
Yeah, that's natural. Where
Okay.
it's like, oh, I'm just getting a piece out. Okay, well there it is, and that's okay. That's it's okay just to put the reps in.
Yeah.
There was a teacher I had years ago whose suggestion in writing was to write the crap out. Was her advice, which was to say, you know, do it. Yeah, again, do as much work as possible, to the point that you have exhausted your reflexes and you've become bored by your common moves. And even now, I mean, there are times when I'll be like, that melody is a little familiar. I've probably, or that figure is familiar. I've probably done that a couple other times.
Yeah.
But, it's, oh, am I ripping myself off? Or is it expressing a motif? That's the
Yeah.
question. But the thought there is, if I notice it, then I can, I can say, I'm going to make sure that I don't repeat something this week. One thing I will do is rotate through instruments and say, I have a bunch of guitars and many of them are in different tunings. So it's like, oh, I'll use this one, which is in this tuning, or I'll use this that has this capability, or this one is particularly, you know, you know, built for this purpose, and so I can use it.
Change a part of the process
Yeah,
to
exactly.
have
Yeah,
some
change.
sort of effect on the outcome.
Yeah, and so I'm limiting myself in some ways, but I'm opening up possibilities in another way. Then I push against that. Like this, for example, I think it was actually 2014, late 2014. I went to this like gear swap thing, and I brought a pedal that I wasn't using, and this one guy had made this extremely cheap guitar out of like a neck with a smashed acoustic with the frets ground off and this plywood body, and it was sort of like what you would like if you were a high. This is not an insult. This is if you're a high school student in wood shop and you kind of remembered seeing a Klein guitar and you wanted to reproduce it from memory, like this is the kind of thing you'd cut out. And I need to have this. So like, will you trade a pedal for it? Yes. And so like I have this fretless that is, I mean, it's tuned with zither pins and it's like very crude, but it's like there's going to be songs in here. There's in my responding to the instrument and working with it, there's going to be something that comes out.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Changing some part of the process, like saying there's some stuff in 2017 that I did that I thought I'm going to take out all the direct signal and have just the reverb, and that was cool. Some of them were like,
just the wet signal.
Just the wet signal, and I'm going to have the drums in the last minute. Just on impulse, like let's kind of upend the process and see what happens.
Yeah, because I mean, in a way, what makes music interesting is the unexpected, and so you're kind of like throwing unexpected things at yourself to sort of suss out some unexpected music.
Yeah, to get a different response. I mean, it's sort of like there's the debate around using large language models for generating music, and I think that stuff is generally pretty boring. I want to hear the struggle. I want to hear someone try for something and maybe 60% of what they're trying fails, but then this other thing, they've reached this other thing somehow that they wouldn't have got to. Like that's like victory. That's someone pulling something valuable from chaos. Whereas if a machine just grinds through a bunch of examples and comes out with something, like who cares?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why everyone appreciates art, is that there's the struggle inside.
Yeah, and you have your goal, you have what you were going for, and one almost never reaches it. It's not like, oh, that worked out perfectly, exactly the way I intended. No, there's going to be stuff in there that surprised you. Like I will now sit down to, I'll have like an idea in mind. I'll sit down and I'll start working on it. And then the thing that actually comes out is different. So, well, okay, so let's follow that. I've got to get a piece done. I've got to, let's follow what I've got, as opposed to sitting there grinding away at something that's not happening.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel that of like here's the direction I think something's going. Let me just continue experimenting. And then you go back to like the original version and you're like, wow, this is like nothing like what I set out to do.
Right, right. You always end up in a different place.
Yeah.
So each one is a discovery. Um, so we did one thing we did sort of get off the path with was the sine wave stuff, which is that so I'd been doing banks and banks of sine wave stuff, and then I was asked to do an installation. So I thought, well, and the way this installation would work was people would make like certain sounds. There was like a room filled with bubble wrap. I was like, well, there's nothing sonically interesting about a bubble pop. So what can I do with that? And it's like, well, I could delay it, but then it's just like the frequency spectrum is not interesting because it's all the same like bit. Well, then I should make pitch shifts. So then I started doing this big network in Pure Data to do like pitch shifts and delays. And it's like, well, if I set it at one setting, that's going to be boring, right? So I've got to make a change. So then I did this thing where I'd have a random value selector and then a random amount of time to reach the value. Then, once some setting reaches that value, then it gets another random value. And so I'd set this thing up and let it go, and it would be doing, all kinds of wild stuff. It was kind of like, the experience I had at the time being in that installation was kind of like being in a brain eraser or something. It was just, it was like going through something.
Now the live project is like, what is your motivation for continuing to do that? Because it feels like a different kind of creation than like making a song.
Yeah, it is a different kind of creation. It goes back to, I think, when I started public performance, some of the thinking there was, how can I as a solo act do something? Because I could sit there and write songs with pieces, but then I have to like get everybody together and make this band work. Whereas if I'm creating more soundscapey kinds of things, then I can do that as a solo person. Or if I'm intending to go out and perform as a solo person, what kind of structure can I have that's going to make this kind of work? So I've gone through different iterations of that would let me, play guitar and or electronics live. There was one, that pitch shift thing, pitch shift and delay thing that I did. I did a number of performances around that. I used it once for I did an installation at the second conference on deep listening, which was in 2014. I'd also gone to the first and done a little sine wave installation there. And I ended up ultimately getting my deep listening certificate.
Awesome.
When I put that in a hallway, and people kind of had to walk through it. And actually, and this is a big thing for me, was Pauline Oliveros and her partner Ione, made some sounds into it, and the patch kind of freaked out. It was something weird was happening there. So there was definitely some energy going on.
Wow.
But she said it was fun. So I'm like, okay, Pauline Oliveros said this piece was fun. I'm going to go with that. But I was fighting feedback the whole time. And I was one of the student interns at Rensselaer Polytechnic was like, oh, well, let's see if we can figure this out. Oh, we'll put a filter in there. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, I can build a notch filter real fast and put it in there. And that, so I made it work enough because it was like a square hallway, so it was very resonant. And I thought after that, the literal next time someone asked me to do a show, I'm going to do the show, but I'm going to embrace feedback. I'm not fighting it anymore. So I went to the show with the laptop, a converter, and a couple of microphones, and I just like held the microphones out in front of the PA, and that was the sound source. That's one of the earlier pieces on the Sine Wave Bandcamp. It was like July 2014 or something like that.
Awesome.
But it's all feedback. And I did a bunch of those. And then I did some pieces with guitar through that. And it was kind of like, those are kind of seasick, kind of, because you play a note and then the pitch,
Yeah.
but it was an experiment,
Yeah.
And then I thought, after a while, that system tended to work a little better if I did oscillators into it rather than guitar. but then I started thinking, and this is 2019-ish, end of 2019. Like, what about like a simpler delay that's not going to change? Maybe I could like do some long delays, sort of the Frippertronics model, but
Right.
do 4 of them. And also make it several. Like I could stick some notes into these different length delays, and they'll come around again, but each time they'll be offset differently. So then now I've got a field of notes to respond to.
Right.
Like I I could play very fast if I needed to, but at the same time, like that's going to be dangerous because it's going to use up a lot of the sonic field. It's going to be it's not going to be a discovery. You're just going to, oh, there's that thing again. Whereas
Got it.
if it's these longer delay banks comes around again, like, well, now I've got a course to navigate here. I've got these number of notes coming around again. Whatever I play has to be compatible, or it has to be dissonant in an interesting way. So I did a few shows with that, and that was promising. Then the pandemic hit, and
Then you had to move it to a live show.
yeah, well, my thought was, since I had done
Or a
some
live stream.
yeah, I had
Excuse
done
me.
some live streaming before. There was like a few years before I was asked to do a show in Memphis, and I couldn't get away for it, so I worked it out with the promoters that I would live stream from home, and it worked. It was amazing. It was like the promoter plugged his phone. This is the Memphis Concrete Festival. One of the organizers plugged his phone into the PA, and I'm like sitting right here, like live streaming this, to this performance in Memphis, and he like texting back, they're applauding. So it went well. It went all right. And so I had done live streaming before by setting up this IceCast instance in the cloud and streaming to it. And when lockdown happened, I saw friends lamenting online. I was going to go to these shows this week, but now I can't because there's nothing happening. Everything's canceled. I thought, well, I've done live streaming before. Here, I'll do something. It went okay. Some people listened to it, and I thought, well, I might as well put it out, and I might as well do another one next week. And I'll do 8 of them, and the pandemic will be over, and then so that it became a thing that sort of snowballed. Where in the early days of it, it was kind of like, how do I fill an hour? Like that's that's a lot of time to be just improvising, and I got better at it, just from repetition. I had some disastrous tech problems. Some weeks had to be like, oh, well, no show tonight, but I'll do one in a few days. There were, especially in the early pandemic, there were people setting up other streaming events, and there's a community that I'm part of that was doing a lot of this sort of thing, like a lot of in-person events, and we moved them online. So I did some stuff for those, but they were on Twitch, so that got me into doing Twitch streaming.
Sweet.
I was like, oh well, that's great, and I can see the comments. I can see that wow, it's as opposed to
people are applauding.
Yeah, as opposed to IceCast, where like I don't get any stats, and no one can comment unless it's like on social media in some other way.
No human feedback.
Yeah, so I got more human feedback this way, and it's like there's not. I mean, some streamers will be like, "Oh, here's my space," and I, you can see I have a very small room here, and there's not really a good place to put a camera. It's so I put up a visualizer. I have a little
right.
sine wave visualizer that just responds to the live waveform and changes color, because it's if we rotate through the colors, that's at least a little visually different.
Oh yeah.
So that's the practice that I followed in doing these Mondays. And after a certain point, the hour seemed not quite long enough to bring something to completion. So at this point, it's an hour and a half.
And an album.
Yeah, and an album every week.
Awesome. Well, I think we should start listening to some of this music.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go divert from my usual. and we're gonna go kind of on a history tour of onezero's music and start with 2014.
Oh, let's see, what do we have in there?
All right, so you sent me
Ah,
by Cell.
right. So that was interesting.
Well, let's listen
Okay.
to it and we'll come back and talk.
Okay, great.
That was Cell by Cell from Weekly Beats 2014.
Yeah, that one was the impetus for that was I had just gotten a pedal. It was a germanium fuzz, so I wanted to kind of lean into that, and
Yeah.
you know,
And you did.
yeah, I think I had the bass line first, so that was like the, I was just kind of going with it, and it ended up being like satisfying and kind of had me chasing the funk thing for a while. Not immediately, but I know that like in the next few years, like, oh well, what do I feel like doing? Oh, we'll do some funk. We got a wah pedal. Got in fact, I think that prompted me to get a wah pedal. There's wah in there, but it's a purpose built thing for another instrument. So I ended up kind of wedging it in there somehow.
And this was week 37
Yeah,
of 2014.
yeah. So fall-ish of you know of 2014, and it just kind of like woke something up in a way. That's like one of the ones I think of from that year, where it's like, okay, yeah, I really hit something that I'm happy with.
Yeah, I really like the like kind of polyrhythm going on, where it's sort of like upsetting at some points and then like comes back where we're like, okay, and now we're cool, and then like it happens again.
Yes, some of that is also the one fuzz pedal, because it's modeled on the Vox repeater pedal. So there's this hard tremolo that's like the spike that's going on.
Oh yeah, that's what it is.
But it's also not controllable. Like I can't lock it to a MIDI time clock. So I got to get as close as I can, and then
that makes sense.
So that's where it's drifting around a little bit. Got as good as I could, but
I think it's kind of a cool element to it.
Yeah, it's a little less controllable. Or if it were like rigid and on the bar line or something, it might not be as engaging.
So this one, you said, kind of, when you think of 2014, you think a lot about this song.
Yeah, that's the one that's like, okay, yeah, it wouldn't have existed if I hadn't sat down to do something that week.
Yeah.
I didn't go into that week particularly inspired, more so than usual. It was just like, oh, got a pedal, got to, want to use that, And,
one of those weeks where you're like, it all worked out, and that was actually really cool.
Everything fell into place.
All right. We're going to keep it moving on, since I'm playing more songs this week than I ever have to hear the history of onezero. The next one up is going to be Winter Sun from 2016. Here we go. That was Winter Sun from 2016, and a full band. You said how many tracks?
I think 9 tracks on that.
And I would say dramatically different
Yeah.
from 2014 that we just heard.
Yeah, the 2014 track was a little bit of an outlier in that it kind of went hard in that way. There are other ones that from other years that went hard in their way, but this one, so by the time we got to 2016, the part of it was kind of wanting to sum up the year vibe, the changing of the year feeling. It was a little warmer, I remember, so it was just kind of there was like vibe. It's hard to capture.
Yeah.
But I was doing a lot of like multiple drum machines at the time, plus electric piano, some synth. The synth bass was a go to because easy enough to just like tap out on the keyboard.
And this was the final song of
Yeah,
2016. I
final song
forgot
of
to mention that.
2016.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was so that that guitar I'd gotten earlier that year, and just wanted to get a bit of a dubstep thing in a way, but also add some guitar to it. And so there's a sort of moving between melancholy and assuredness kind of a thing, sort of a mixed sensibility. But I do think of that song a lot just because I nailed this feeling.
Yeah, it does have a great feel to it. And we were talking briefly while the song was playing that gets cut out, that I was like, it's cool to see just how your song style and feel has changed. I know we've only listened to one from 2014 and one from 2016, very small sample size, but when I think about the tracks that I make, it's hard for me to really see the evolution if I continue to do this. But it's cool to look back at yours and just see how much you've kind of like morphed and reinvented, and which we're gonna continue to hear as we go through these.
I think it kind of goes back a little bit to one of the things you had mentioned earlier was that there are sort of left turns throughout the years where maybe a seam runs out. There's something. It's kind of like I'm not feeling doing this right now, or like it's been a while since I've done funk stuff because I feel like I explored that and expressed that, and I'm other people do it very well. So
Yeah,
do we need my adding something to the pile just to say that I did it?
right. So it's sort of like a find a way to be good at your own original stuff versus kind of creating other people's stuff so much.
Maybe not so much that as I mean, a genre is a framework, and I I could try to do something for the first time and probably do it badly, and there could be learning that comes from that. So it's still worth doing, but also I have to look at what am I going to feel like completing in a week, for example. Like
Mhm.
I think also with with the album a week going on as well, there's there's a certain amount of time and attention required there, and it makes me perhaps a little less likely to spend time working on a drum arrangement necessarily. Like I got got to make sure that I'm focusing on life. Life has to
Yeah,
happen, but it's
yeah,
there's everything's kind of an opportunity cost in a way. Like if I
true.
don't if there are some weeks where it gets extremely busy, and I'll say, well, okay, about all that I can do right now for practical reasons is do an ambient improv. There we are.
Mhm.
That's out there. That took me a little bit longer than the time it took to play it. The time it takes to listen to it is about the time it took to create the thing.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily devalue it. That's more those kinds of improvisations are, I'm very close to the source of musical inspiration, because I've started the clock. I'm in the moment. I have to come up with something, and sometimes I'll do 3 or 4 of them, and it's okay. Well, this is the best one. We'll put it.
And you don't have the time for second guessing, like trying to perfect like all the other things when you're composing a song.
Yeah, I mean, I've done that too. Like, for example, the there's the one community I'm part of, which is also where I know JWH from, and Emily, and it was we were doing these various in-person get-togethers, and I think Josh had mentioned how I had a conversation with them and got them interested in the Weekly Beats thing. And that was actually in 2016 at this one event up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And I remember working on my track in the motel room. I'm like, okay, well, I've got to like kind of remove myself from what's happening for a few hours while I work on this thing. And there was an opportunity cost there. It was like, okay, I'm working on this thing now, and I'm kind of happy with the thing that came out as a result. But also, like, it's just trying to find the right balance. And maybe some weeks require more stuff. But I mean, if I go in with like a bunch of drum arrangements, I want to do like 4 tracks of drums and 2 basses, and it's like, well, now I've got to spend time making all this stuff work together.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. You've got a lot of stuff going on and a lot of goals, and sometimes those goals don't match up with 2 drum tracks and like a huge arrangement.
Yeah, there's another factor also, which is that I think the more tracks that you throw at something, sometimes it's you can sustain interest by switching instruments or effects around, but there's a question of how much interest can you sustain by focusing on, say, melody or chords or timing, and that may lead us right up to the next left turn.
Which is
that
star hopping.
Yes.
All right, let's listen to this one. That was Star Hopping, and this was from week 39, 2021.
Yes. Yeah. So for that, I remember at that time I was listening to Charlambides a bit, and I was thinking about, well, that was a band of two guitars, two guitars and voice, and there's like a fairly rich vibe with that minimalist setup. And so I was thinking a bit about that. At the time, I was also in a work situation in which I was being paged fairly frequently, and fortunately working at home. But I was, there was, I did not want to spend too much more time sitting in front of the computer working out, working out
Yeah.
drum placements and MIDI piano roll stuff.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, let's just take a left turn and try that. And then that ended up kind of being the detour of the next subsequent years. I mean, I went back for some pieces to do more full band stuff, but
but the minimalist guitar stuff kind of became the norm.
Yes, it became sort of the current landscape. I mean, some of the thought there was, what can I do with 2 or 3 tracks like that? Star Hopping had like 5 tracks, and I mean, some not all going at once, but different flavors.
Yeah, different layers.
Yeah, and I thought, well, let's, what can I do with like 3? And three's a fairly natural number for guitar if you've got you got your bridge pickup, your neck pickup, and you've got both pickups. And because if you record the same way on 2 different tracks, you can end up with some comb filtering, when things are out of phase, which can be a sound in its own. But it was something I was trying to avoid. But also, it gave I fell into this thing of keeping it as direct and unaffected as possible. And some of the thinking there was, well, now I have to work on my arrangement, so I'm not hitting the same note at the same time in 2 different channels. Now I have to think about, I'm not giving myself too much sonic variation. So can I make a piece flow and sustain interest with chord progressions and melody changes and timing changes? Can I make this thing out of parts and have it flow together into a kind of whole?
Yeah.
Whereas some pieces I'd done in the past were kind of like floaty, and I mean even like the beat oriented pieces, it gets into a mood and kind of stays there, even though certain things vary. But also like there aren't too many chord changes in some of the earlier stuff. And I mean now some things like there's like going back to Cell by Cell, that's pretty much kind of that's a maybe more modal. I mean, it's got it's got pretty much one chord, and the variation is in the melody of the lead guitar and the melody of the bass, and then some dropouts. Well, maybe there's one chord change in there, but still,
well, it sounds like you are kind of like stripping everything down and focusing on really the core parts of what makes a piece interesting.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And one thing I've noticed in this period also is the great variation that comes from just like how my touch is on the instrument.
Like all there's room to notice all those like subtleties. And like you said, like if you got 3 guitar tracks, it's like what rhythms can you make with one guitar, and then what melodies, and how do they not clash with each other? And this is kind of like a whole exploration of constraints in a way.
Yeah, exactly. There's the having multiple tracks means it's a conversation. So there's something going on, and then I can respond to it. So like there's always I usually actually start very quickly. Just sit down and start playing something. Oh well, that might have a thing in it. Okay, well what if I respond to that? Okay, now I got two things. How would I respond to that? Do I put chords under it? Do I have like a third voice? What do I want to do with that? And that's kind of occupied the last few years for the most part. There were some detours. Um, I feel like I might be coming to the end of this in some fairly
interesting.
Not. I mean, none of the future is foreseeable, but
Yeah.
there have been a few junctures where I thought, I'm kind of feeling like there's, is there a sense of discovery or is this a retread? And typically I'll feel something that I can discover is happening. But
is that like you're almost feeling like you're in that sort of musical rut realm and you need to take a left turn somewhere?
Maybe not so much rut but in the sense of like compressing something down, then there's energy. You put energy into squeezing something or reducing something, getting something smaller, and then it breaks
and there's
out.
like an expansion.
Yeah. So it might be in that sense. But then they're thinking in this terms of this genre, there are some approaches that I kind of keep going at. And then when I sit down to actually do them, they end up being denser. Like there's, I've kind of wanted to do something very sparse with a lot of space in it. And I haven't really done that yet. So it might be using the same working methods, but expanding in form.
Reducing even more.
Reducing, but also inviting more silence in. That might be one approach.
Letting it breathe more.
Letting it breathe more. There might be there's some pieces I've done in this realm that have been more dialogues between instruments rather than I've typically stayed to one instrument for each week out of the thought that first off, I mean, really intonation of guitars. I mean, you can do your own intonation, and I do, work on my instruments, but fret placement is not terribly consistent across instruments.
Mm-hmm.
So like I can kind of hear out of tuneness on some things. Now I did build an instrument specifically for that.
I do want to talk about that.
Yeah,
I think we should listen to Eastern next.
Yes, so this was toward the beginning of this is the 2022 when for
week 41
for part of 2021 and part of 2022 I'd gotten away from the solo guitar thing and gone back to fuller arrangements, but then I got back into the 3-4 guitars again with this one. And I mean, maybe a few weeks before, my memory of it is that this was fairly early on in trying it again.
Got it. All right, here we go. Eastern. All right, that was Eastern. And you said that this one was kind of like a bit of a breakthrough moment for you?
Yeah, there's the middle eight section that that seems a bit delicate, and then it kind of comes out into this stronger section end that has a has a kind of a very yearning melody to it, that was like, oh yeah, I did hit something. I pulled something out of the ether here with this one.
Love it when that happens.
So it was a little bit of a surprise, I think. Was So that prompted me to think, oh, I can get enough of these pieces together and I'll put them out. I'll do some collections.
Got it. So this was sort of a moment where you're like, "Oh, I kinda like this style, and I'm hitting some good things with it. Maybe I can make, like, an album of all this style."
Yeah, I'd been thinking of collecting a bunch of pieces together and putting them on because I hadn't done that with the weekly beats before. And some of the other pieces that were similar in approach, I would do them and I'd think, oh, I've got something here. When I listen to it, like, by the third or fourth day of listening to it, it's kind of like, oh, this is, maybe this goes on a bit too long, or maybe there's not quite enough here, or I take that section out or whatever. And that, this one didn't require too much fiddling. There were a few little timing tweaks, but it was the overall shape of it, the direction, the melodies were all, okay, this is leading to something. This feels like
And how do you feel like your style had changed from Star Hopping that we just heard to Eastern? I know that this one is more going more towards, like, a true clean guitar sound without the distortion, but there's still similar, like, minimal guitar tracks.
yeah, there's still a minimal approach in a lot of ways. In some ways, I think this is a little less minimal than star hopping, because I'm not letting these big notes sustain into a big reverb. I'm making it
Yeah.
more. This is
There's, like, a rhythm section, there's, like
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And they pass off the rhythm section, like which pickup is doing the rhythm. Just a little bit of sonic variety, but typically, yeah, there's a rhythm section, so it'll come in, it'll drop out, or the rhythm section will now go to a different voice, and so it's more of a conversation. Whereas star hopping was kind of uh, one thing with a lot of supporting the big chords,
Got it.
but this is more of like a trio and a conversation, more finger picking, more uh, more engage, like maybe a more immediate engagement with the instrument.
Yeah.
You can hear a little bit more of the details, whereas with the fuzz, I can my
Yeah.
attack can vary from note to note, but it's all kind of squashed. But this,
And to kind of touch on what you were just mentioning about your instruments is I know that you have a and I think this is the guitar you were talking about building a just intonation guitar.
yeah, that kind of comes from one of the sine wave performances in a way. So the in 2023, I did an in-person performance as part of the PRF barbecue in Chicago, and flew in for it. So I didn't want to fly with a guitar, so I ended up borrowing a friend's guitar, which was an aluminum baritone guitar, owned by Christopher Williams from Maple Stave, and they're a band from North Carolina who are very dynamic and complex. And two baritone guitars, and drums, very intense and very impactful. And one of the things that I didn't do was I didn't think to ask, was it in a conventional tuning or was it? And it was not in a conventional tuning, and I did not find that out until my set began. I'm like,
Oh
what?
no.
So I'm like leaning way over trying to hear this thing acoustically before I fade up the notes with the volume pedal, because I didn't quite know what I was going to get. And so that performance was me learning how to play that guitar. But the exciting thing was in the last piece, I I had this minor second going on the low string, and so I had like I'd put one of the notes in one delay bank and the other in another, and when they would come around, this phenomenal pulsing would happen in the PA, and I can't really hear it in these headphones, but if I play it in the car shakes. I'm like, this is fantastic. This is absolutely hilarious. So, I was like, I want to do more with that. And it's, maybe if I, start getting to like, half tones and or quarter tones. I mean, half tones we already have, but quarter
Microtonal
tones.
stuff.
And yeah, so I was thinking about that, and I ended up looking into a couple different builders who made necks that way, and finally finding Ron Sword with metatonal music, and commissioned a neck. So I said, well, this is what I want, and I kind of want like 24 frets per octave, and he said, well, okay, what tuning do you want? And so I was like, well, I kind of want it to be close-ish I want every other to be close-ish to conventional fretting, but the nearest just intonation interval, and then I'd like some other just intonation interval in between. So the actual fretting scheme. Okay, now I can no longer play bar chords. I can't play them on this instrument because the frets are too close together. It's too fuzzy.
Yeah, I saw a picture of it. I was like, whoa, that's a lot of frets.
It's a lot of frets. It's it does lend itself to finger picking. Although my fingers are a little big for the low end of the neck, so I've had to adjust my playing style a little bit for those pieces. I started doing a few of them toward the end of last year, and I've done ambient performances with it as well. It's an instrument I'm discovering still. It's a kind of conversation.
How long have you had it at this point?
I had ordered the neck in 2023. It took Ron a little while to get it to me, and then after that, it took me months to put the instrument together. So it was a lot of the slowdown was like 2024. A lot of it was me like grinding away on like, I've got to get the wiring right, and the Tele Deluxe, like there's not a lot of room to work, so it was like just taking me forever, and then just making sure that the frets were level and crowned. I mean, like leveling was difficult because like I have a straight edge for regular, for conventional fretted guitars to see where the neck is, to see whether it's got a bow or a back bow or what. And this one I had to like make a tool to tell me whether this is in back bow or do I have relief on this. I finally did it. I learned a lot about fret crowning and fret filing, and it was, it's about where I want it. I did play out with it in May, like last year, but that was like too early. It was not playable yet.
Okay.
That was an awkward performance, but I mean, I'm like, okay.
So you're still getting it like set up and
now it's about right. I mean, the weather changes, so like the way the weather's changed, I probably need to loosen the truss rod just the tiniest bit. But it's kind of about right. But that's
And so you've had enough time to kind of experiment with it, and what do you like about it so far? Because I've never played any sort of like microtonal or just intonation instrument, let alone guitar.
It does depend on the fretting scheme that you've chosen, and I think if I were doing another one, I would choose different intervals for variety, but also I wouldn't have them quite so close together up above the 12th fret. As you know, I mean, it's like really, I have to kind of like really come in vertically and get right down on top of them with my fingernail, because otherwise it's just the note's not going to sound right. But the quality of the harmonies is very different. I mean, your octaves and fifths sound about right. They sound normal. They don't sound unusual. But when you get out beyond that, the harmonies get very, very different.
That's when you get those like clashing waves, like
sometimes
you said on the
if they're really close, you'll get the difference tones. But then in between there is an interesting territory because you get stuff that sounds in this case the fretting scheme is there. There's a lot of pentatonic stuff I can reach, so it sounds pentatonic-ish. You know, it sounds conventional in that sense. But then like a fret or two off of it, if one fret off can sound out of tune, and but like say maybe 3 to 4 frets off of it, or you know a further distance away, like something that's not quite an octave, sounds. Um, I think it can sound sour at first, but then it starts to sound just different.
Yeah.
Some of the harmonies sound brighter and more direct than conventional instruments. You know, some of them sound like alien territory. So that's the interesting that's the interesting bit. There is the not this is out of tune, but this is we're in alien territory now. Like you know how you feel when you're like okay, you know how you feel with a major chord, you know how you feel with a minor chord, you know how you feel with like minor sevenths and some other stuff. But then like this is it's hard to know how to take this sound.
Yeah, because I mean, we're so used to hearing our standard tuned instruments and hearing these like kind of weird just differences in essentially wavelengths that we're not used to.
It's
Like,
some of it's the wavelengths, but some of it is also it's the primary thing is the relationship between them because
right,
it's
yeah,
all
the
about your reference
relationship
pitch.
between the wavelengths. Yeah.
So and in this case, I've got it tuned. Each the strings are not purely just intonation intervals from each other. They're a little more like I got fifths and fourths, and I could tweak them a little bit and make them more purely mathematical from each other. That would make the relationships even a little stranger. So that might be something that I do coming up because I chose to get it frets all the way across as opposed to picking one reference pitch and locking in because your Ron will do partial frets, will do fretlets, so that
Oh, where you can like move
if you've
move
chosen
them.
well he doesn't do the movable ones. There's the guy in Turkey who does those.
All
It's
right.
like if you bought a fretboard, buying a fretboard from him is about $1,000. Um,
Yeah, I've seen those movable ones on the old internet.
yeah, there's a guy in Germany who made one, and I actually emailed him, and he's like, "I'm never doing another one. If I ever did another one, I'd order it from the guy in Turkey." So,
Oh, yeah.
so like it's arduous, and I was thinking like setting that up would be kind of a pain, but
Yeah.
it might be interesting to explore making fretboards for myself and swapping them out or something.
I mean, I know you're always looking for another hobby, so
I've got too many instruments right now, but it's like, but at the same time, like each instrument has an
yeah.
expression. But in this case, it's like the alien territory gets kind of interesting. You've got
Yeah.
these are relationships that we've not been trained into yet. So how do we respond? What's that like? And you could do it with oscillators. You could just set up a bunch of oscillators in Max or PD and set them up to particular intervals. You don't have to do it as frequencies. You could do it as frequencies, but then you can detune off of that. And you could that's sort of like Lamont Young's Dream House, where you've got like a 32 pitch piece that's blasting out these speakers all the time. Have you ever experienced that?
I have not.
It's really compelling. I mean, I've been a few times, and they give you like literature to read, like to explain what it is that you're experiencing. And I noticed, like the first time I went, that like as I moved the page, the sound was different in my ears
Oh,
because it's
wow.
reflecting off of everything in the room. And if you turn your head a
Wow.
little bit, the piece changes. If somebody comes in, the piece changes.
And what
Um,
is this dream house called again?
the Dream House. It's on Church Street in New York. It's Lamont Young, who's the kind of the granddaddy of minimalism, and in a way, the granddaddy of ambient music in a sort of way. You could also say Eric Satie similarly. Lamont Young would
All
also
right.
point you to Terry Jennings, and there's, but there was like there was apparently at Mills College in the Bay Area in like the late 50s, early 60s. There was this graduate seminar in music where like class members were like Lamont, Terry Riley, Pauline Oliveros, so it's some other people who had gone on to to affect the history of music.
Wow.
So it's kind of interesting to me that these people go back to a scene. That there's
Mm-hmm.
the experimental music scene was a bunch of outsiders who kind of knew each other. So
Who
it's
knows what weekly beats will
yeah. I mean, there's there are like people. I know Josh has been collaborating with a bunch of people. We've done some collaborations. There's a really collaborative community out there. So it's there's always an opportunity to get into something and cross pollinate.
Oh, for sure. I need to do more of that next year. Well, let's keep the music going and bring it all the way up to 2024, The Knot. All right, that was The Knot from week 46 of Weekly Beats 2024.
Yeah,
You
go ahead.
said on this one when you sent me some notes, this one felt like you'd finally opened the door accidentally and were able
Yes,
to
it
walk
was
through.
the 11 was kind of a having opened a door.
Got it.
Although, I mean, earlier that year, thinking about it, I'd done earlier last year. I'd done a few pieces in different time signatures. Like there was a piece that I did in. Were you aware of the of Drew Daniels' dream genre? He's
I
half
don't
of
know.
Matmos, and he had posted about dreaming this genre called Hit'em that was in
No,
five
I'm not
four
familiar.
and 212 beats per minute, and all with super crunched out sounds. And so I thought, well, that's maybe I'll try something in that. So I did something in 5, but I was also doing like some other finger picking stuff. So I think that there's a piece somewhere in there that's 7. But these
But
odd
this one
time
you came up with the finger picking
and
and then
discovered it was 11.
discovered like, oh, this is like an odd time signature.
Yeah, so it was like, okay, well, now that it's 11, I can count it out, as the 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2, and that'll like keep me on track throughout the tracking. Um, so I thought, well, how many like things can I do in 11 here?
Yeah.
So the chord progression ends up being fairly simple because I'm already doing too much fancy stuff with a time signature. But the fact that I kind of made it feel natural is what was also kind of a revelation. It
Yeah,
didn't
like
feel like an exercise.
and it didn't feel to me listening to it that it was like a really odd signature.
Right, right. It feels more natural. Um, Part of it is because I think it's you get you almost get 4 units. It's like
Yeah.
you get four waltz or 3 full waltz time measures and one that's got the last beat
Yeah.
stripped off of the back.
And this is kind of more of this like, stripped down guitar. How do you feel like 2024 was different from the stuff that you're making in 2022?
That's a good question. I think it's a continuation, though
Yeah.
there were some promising left turns, like the into the different time signatures. There's definitely a couple different tracks. Like there's a more wistful melancholy track going on through the year, but then there are some that are more stepping forward. Like the knot is very fast, and it's kind of headlong. It's rushing into something, and I mean that was kind of an energy that I got something out of. Whereas the more like uh, the more melancholy stuff, I feel like I'm trying to move away from that. Like it's not the time to be melancholy. We don't have that luxury. But then I mean,
Yeah.
people are going to feel how they're feeling. I'm not the mood police.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just what comes out at the time.
Yeah, what happens is what happens.
Yeah.
And like if I'm having a certain kind of week, then something is going to come out that way.
And what is your like, cuz you've kind of been steady with this style for a few years now. What is that process like? Do you just start playing and recording and
Yeah,
then
I turn on the recorder and I don't know what I'm going to do. Or what I'll typically do is maybe I'll sit down to play and I'll come up with a figure and okay, that's worth recording, and I'll you okay, so now I've got like
got a piece
a
part?
bar. I've got a bar of that. So
Yeah.
what's our I've done 4 iterations of this pattern. Which that itself is a kind of habit. So I can look at doing 3. There's a number of these that are sort of like that, like 3 repetitions with a breath at the end,
Yeah.
or there's or the phrase has a little rest in there, which
And you're kinda talking about, like, what are the like the self-imposed rules or boundaries that I'm operating in this process, and where can I like break out of them to find some new
Something a
ground?
little new. Yeah, so, some of it's that, like if I've been doing a lot of this, which I mean, within the constraint of direct guitar, then and three parts, have I tapped it out, or is there something a little more I could do? Like I ended up in part the one of the bands that I'm in. There's a process of doing a different concept each performance, and we did one recently that was at an all night art event, and the my sound in that band relies a lot on the Montreal Assembly count to five pedal, which is kind of a delay with a buffer that goes in three different directions. It kind of does pitch shifting, reverse, and stuff like that. It's very chaotic. Um, and I was thinking, I kind of want more tonal variety. So I ended up getting a lo-fi pedal that has a reputation for being kind of ugly, but I find that I can work with it. So I ended up using it in the improv this past Monday, and there's a little bit of it in this most recent weekly piece that I put up at Street Club. That it's got like a little hint of chorusiness to it, um, and that's like some sonic variation,
Yeah.
just because I wanted to use it.
Yeah.
But it kind of it's kind of like letting me. The thought is kind of letting me rock the boat a little bit on this approach, rather than let me grind out another thing.
Yeah.
In this case, like a lot of times I'll reach for a different instrument. I'll say I'm going to do this, like one guitar I keep in a tuning that's sort of like John Fahey's tuning, but
Yeah.
it's like a baritone in like fifth, fourth, fifth, fourth, fifth, fourth, fifth, and then a major second on top. And
Like,
it's
do you find that you keep coming back to this style, or that you've kind of settled in this one particular area because you feel like there's more experimentation to do with these limits? Or like what else is it about it?
Yeah, I think at this point there's a I'd done a lot of reduction sonically to get to this point of paying attention to fingering and note expression and tonality coming from my fingers and on the strings, and there's a focus on the immediacy of picking up an instrument and just like a person in an
Yeah.
instrument, and not a bunch of stuff that's getting in the way. And I like the immediacy of that, but I'm also starting to feel like there's an opportunity to kind of rock the boat some, kind of broaden the palette again. To there's really nothing stopping us from doing anything in music. I
True.
mean,
True.
like you could say, I mean, there's oh well, I've got a bass line and I've got a drum pattern, and so I've got this groove going, and I can put some compatible chords over the top. Okay, now I've got a thing, and it's this genre. So I want to do this other thing, but I can't do it because it's not in that genre. No, you can do that thing. If
Yeah.
you want to pull out your answering machine messages and play them backwards over top of this thing, and and have a plastic milk jug as your kick drum. You could
Yeah. Could do whatever.
you can do
Well,
those things. You're allowed to. So why not just start shaking the boat a little bit?
yeah, since 2014, I imagine that you've been in this similar sort of place where you're like, how can I rock the boat?
Right, right.
Do you remember a time where that happened, and like kind of what you did?
Yeah, there was one. There was a. I want to say it was 2016. I think there was one stretch where I'd gotten into doing. I'd kind of been tired of doing like the drum machine, synth, bass thing, and I did a number of pieces using. I think there was a live coding system called tidal cycles. So like your piece is essentially like a line of code or a few lines of code in this live coding system. And I did a number of those to kind of step out from things. So it was like a radical change of approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I found this one. I'll have to go back to the score, but I found like one kind of system that sounded like throwing a vintage Gretsch drum kit down a flight of stairs. And it was, like very slowly, like, it was kind of,
Very slowly.
it was like that was interesting. There, um, that's one way, like changing your system is, getting out of your digital audio workstation and into something else is one way.
Yeah, so where that turn, did that in like kind of end that cycle that you were in before and
It
take
it
you
it
to a new place?
it didn't so much take me to a new place as it itself was kind of like, well, this is a minor seam that I kind of ran out. And but then when I went back to working with Ableton, then it was like kind of like, okay, well, now I'm a little freed up from habit.
Got it. Like you
And
stepped out
yeah,
enough to be like, okay, I'm a little bit further away from like just my repetitive workflow.
right. And in the case of like this sort of guitar approach, I don't necessarily think that this coming week will be a radical change from 3 tracks of guitar necessarily, but I'm going to start looking for ways to change something, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe it will be a radical change for probably a few weeks, but also then, well, now that I'm refreshed from that, maybe do, something with a different structure or something with a different timbre to it. There's a little bit of, one of the similarly one of the problems that I was thinking about with the Monday performances is, there's a lot of like, okay, fade in long tones, let them interact. Make no choices that are not necessarily too dissonant, because I've also got friends who are listening to this as part of their meditation practice. I don't want to start disturbing that
Right.
practice, but at the same time, I don't want to be, well, this is more of the same thing. And
Yeah.
so I felt a little bit of juice this week with changing up the timbres a bit more, dealing with the risk of a harsher timbre.
Mm.
And it is kind of a risk, but also if I'm controlling it, controlled risk,
Yeah.
there's a little bit of a challenge there. I'm balancing something, and so there may be some opportunities for making timbral changes, making structural changes, taking some other chances. I think there was a sense of I think over the winter I had a sense of like retrenchment. We've got this very uncertain world, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a you know there is at times, do you want to be taking a lot of risks, or do you want to be taking fewer risks while you figure out your place in things?
Yeah.
And some people don't have that luxury, but as in music we certainly have that luxury.
Yeah. That's very true.
So it's finding my place in things, and finding how am I going to respond to what's going on. I think with, at least in my experience of music, is that sometimes I'm getting a better sense of what's going on in listening for how the music's going to appear than like working something out logically.
Say that one more time.
Well, so if I'm thinking about, like, what is the state of the world, and I'm trying to follow some logical progression, that logical progression could end up being, it could be I'm wrong, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, I know what I know, and I know what I know, and I know what I think I know, but like what's what's really out there, what's really happening, and sometimes like the sense of music is a little more honest than my thinking something through in a different way. And this is my own experience, but
yeah, I'm wondering where we should go next, because I've got 2 more songs to play.
Okay.
One is Paulo Prieto.
Yes, that was the one that set me off on doing the microtonal stuff.
Okay, maybe we should listen to that one from your sine wave project.
Yeah. Okay, and the moment to listen for is, I think, 2.5 minutes in, so it's a long piece, but
we're here to listen, so
yeah. So
y'all better listen.
And if you're listening through small speakers, you probably won't hear it because they're not going to be moving enough air. But if you've got a subwoofer, you'll hear it.
Yeah, throw that sub on. Here we go. I just mystified at like how you create this stuff, but I need to check out one of your streams at some point.
Yeah, the system here is, I mean, it sounds synthetic, but it's just guitar through fuzz and wah pedal and a volume pedal to take the attack off.
Oh, okay.
In this particular case, since I was traveling light, so I brought only the volume pedal, and for the fuzz, I got a converter that overloaded more musically than the one I had been using. So this was like fuzz by overloading the converter. I added a wah circuit to the performance patch, so I didn't have to carry a pedal. And then I had
and so this is all going through Max Live.
Yes, it's all going. Oh, not Max for Live, but Max MSP.
So Max MSP.
Yeah, so that's in this case version 8. They're on to version 9 now, but there's I've got a bug in this patch that
and
doesn't
so
work with 9.
This patch though is something that you
created. Yeah,
assembled.
In this case, it's 8 tap in, tap out buffers. That's basically your delay buffer with feedback. So they're, in this case, the delay times are between probably 28 seconds and a minute. So 8 but each delay bank is a different, it's a different length. So I will assign, each note is going to end up being assigned to a different delay, so it's going to come around again at a different interval than its neighbors.
Okay. And the difference between like the lower tones and the higher tones, is that just like filtering in the patch?
No, that's me playing. I mean, the difference is in like my note selection.
Got it.
So there is the first bass note that is going to matter shortly,
because it's going to come back around.
It's going to come back around. And then there's fairly shortly after it, there's going to be one that's a minor second away from it.
I really like this play-by-play. Because, I mean, this stuff so
There's the minor second. It just happened. No, they haven't coincided yet. But when they do coincide, there's a pulse.
Right?
Yeah, I think that's the first coinciding.
Yeah, I can see how the subwoofer would go off on that.
Yeah, it was kind of hilarious hearing it through a PA. It was a good moment.
And awesome meditation music.
Yeah, I know that these are successful when I've done them in person and people like lie down on the floor, which was. That was like, okay, I'm doing the right thing. And it's kind of in the moment, not really paying too much attention about to what's going on around me, because I'm like listening for what direction is the music going to want to go into.
Got it.
In this case, I also had my head right next to the neck of the instrument to try to like predict what I was going to play next.
Got it, because like there's so much stuff in delay banks going on that like you're not immediately hearing your input, right?
Or I mean, I can predict what it's. At this point, I've heard enough that I know what the general sonic field is. But since this instrument was in a tuning that I wasn't familiar with.
Oh, this is the one from that performance.
Yes, yeah. This is the last piece where I'd finally got a hang of it. But I like if I moved from this note on this string to the next string up, I couldn't be sure that it was going to be the note that I expected. So I had to make sure, or else I'm going to be like, oh, here's a guy fumbling around on this instrument, and then if I do that, I stick it into a delay line. It's going to be around for a while. So.
That was the sine wave performance that we spoke about a little bit earlier, where you had the weird, I'm going to call it weird intonation guitar that you were like trying to figure out how to use.
This was actually a friend's borrowed instrument that was in a different tuning.
Oh, okay.
But since it was a baritone, the difference in cycles per second between the two notes on the bass string was a very low difference, and it was enough to get that pulsing.
Yeah,
and that's what set me off on thinking, I would like to explore that more and have an instrument where I can do that at will and have some closer intervals to mess with. That's what sparked me into doing the building the just intonation guitar.
Sent you off on that journey.
Yeah, which is still, I mean, the original instrument, not a just intonation instrument, but it was the thinking about the close difference tones that I was focusing on.
Very cool. And awesome meditation music.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah. And I need to go back and check out more of your albums from that project. And check out your live stream.
Well, I have a post on Blue Sky. Like some of them are more. I'd recommend certain ones more than others, but I can give you a list. I mean, at this point, I wouldn't say, listen to all of them, because I mean it's 257 releases. It's entirely.
I mean, I got a podcast to run, man. I don't have.
Yeah, it's too much to listen to. But I mean, there's certain ones that stick out for certain reasons. I would say, like last week's definitely did something. 256 was also very good. The 258 that's coming out, I'd recommend.
All right.
I kind of hit something. I mean, the interesting thing there is that when you remove the string attack, then timbre becomes very important, and so we start thinking, at least like depending on how the the wah pedal is set, depending on which kind of fuzz setting I'm using, depending on how I'm holding the note, or like if I'm using an ebow, or what the position of the ebow is. All those things matter in terms of what kind of association we make. And sometimes there are timbres that sound more like wind instruments, like a lot of brass in some of these,
Mm.
some like French horn, tuba, um, some bassoon, oboe, flute.
And that's all through this setup
It's and
with
the timbres are all just like my playing through a few tone shaping pedals, and the max patch is just primarily there for delay and a little bit of tone coloring, but it's not. There's a little bit of a I have a tremolo in there that I use sometimes very lightly. It gets a little more wind quality if it's subtle. There's a pitch shifter that I use more when I'm playing pedal steel, because that gives me extended baritone range. But generally, it's about placing notes in time, and then I know they're coming back around, so I can respond to them. But it's kind of like improvising with a partner.
yeah, because like you're throwing these notes into a delay chain and knowing that they're going to come back around and setting up what you're going to do when they come back around and also loading back in the delay chain,
Yeah, so I'm adding material, but I'm also and also
interacting with the material.
when I put if since I'm usually swapping the delay lines for each additional note, they don't come back in the order that I played them in the first time. So it's going to be,
Aha.
there's a little bit of a surprise.
Well, I mean, you've had some practice with that setup with, 258 odd albums. So, like, that is a whole deep experimentation of this whole, setup that you made, and it's super cool.
Yeah, so, some of it is like I've given myself a regular gig to become familiar with this and just work on. Now it's not just filling time; it's about how close can I get to the moment of musical discovery when you're I got something.
Yeah.
How can I make that consistently a thing?
Yeah.
So there's that aspect to it. There's some optimization that I've done to the patch. There are changes that I've made. I started with 4, and then I added like sometime 2021. I think I expanded it to 8, and it was a. It's actually been an ongoing question of user interface design, because I also mirror the patch to an iPad. There's a mirroring app that you can run, so that like, this designated rectangle, this will also be expressed on an iPad in a touch interface. And so I can make something very immediate. Like, for example, there's a system I have for taking a baseline number of seconds or number of milliseconds and then having multiples or subdivisions of that. So then I can say, well, this piece I'm going to do, it's going to be based on like a 7 structure where things are in a 7 kind of relationship, or 5. And 4 sounds very like expected. There's
Mm.
some that I've done in 4. Then I've also got I've got the system where those divisions will populate buttons, so I can very quickly assign delay values to these and know that they're going to be in a certain relationship. Or if I want to make it more complex, I can just make them random up to a certain number and then
Yeah.
select from there. And so then the relationships are very complicated, sort of like the way Brian Eno did music for airports, of recording a tape loop, running off a random amount of tape, and then doing the loop. So he had these multiple different loops of different lengths. So
Mhm.
that's why the parts come around at different relationships.
And kinda to go back to something you said a minute ago, it's like just like weekly beats, you are setting aside the time and outputting something that gives you kind of like this dedicated space to do all this experimentation and learning and musical discovery and surprising yourself about what comes out at the end.
Right. Yeah, and it is to some extent, as you've mentioned, getting the reps in, because I think my improvisation has gotten better from doing that. Um,
Yeah.
and then there's always the search for new challenges. How can I destabilize it, but not too much?
Yeah.
There's that aspect to it. There's also a certain one of the things I found both with Weekly Beats and with this is I think before working with weekly beats, I had a tendency toward a certain kind of perfectionism, like work on something, and then don't know where it's going. Oh, I'll just
Yeah.
set it aside. It never comes out. And so I was doing typically the releases that I would do before that were particular live performances. And so because like, well, here's a thing that took place during a particular time. That's what it is. And that itself is a kind of subversion of the perfectionist impulse, because there's a limit to how nice I can make this thing,
Yeah.
because this is
Kind of
just
is
what
what it
happened. It's
is.
documentary. Whereas what I'm finding with Weekly Beats, there is a quality of like working to refine something before releasing it, but then also saying, okay, we've got a deadline. It's a cutoff. This is
Yeah.
what I did by this time.
Out to sea at some
Yes,
point.
it has to do what it's going to do. And the more I do them, in a way, the less any one of them like makes or breaks my feeling about playing music. If I'm
Yeah.
off this week and I kind of got nothing, I'm going to try something. I mean, there was a piece that I did with, trying to remember the name of it. It was from 2023, um, where it was either 2023 or maybe 2024. I can't. It was where uh, I thought I'm going to break out of the box with I did like some distorted guitar that was very like clipped, like I like played these chords and just like chopped the snippets. It was a very like hard um, cut, and I arranged that very intuitively. And I thought, well, that was an experiment. It's weird, it's and then Josh had heard it and he wanted to incorporate it in a piece that he was working on. So he added vocals over top, and it works fine with the vocals. It was just it was the piece was called Avoid Cross Foxes. Um,
I have to check it out.
and that was either at Street Club or Weekly Beats. I think it might have been on Weekly Beats, but it
But
was.
one where you were like, I'm just gonna break out of the box
Yeah,
and experiment
I'm gonna just turn the table over. I'm gonna go for something that is probably not gonna work
and still release it.
and still release it. Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
well, here's an experiment, and who was
I think
harmed
that's
by it?
my issue is like I sort of limit my experimentation because I'm like, well, I gotta get something out. So maybe I just need to
Tread
say
water for this week and
flip the table over and just still put it out.
right. I mean, you could think of some change that you could make that you wouldn't ordinarily do.
Yeah.
Like I went through a phase with the MIDI stuff where I was like heavily gating drums. Like, so they were like real, like they were like clicks or pops. And I mean, then I kind of got out of that. It's like kind of heard what I needed to hear from that. But I mean, but it's a technique that I could use at any time.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
there's
in your bag of
no, yeah,
tricks.
it's not something I'll pull out typically, but if I want to destabilize something, I could go for that.
Yeah. We're nearing the end of the
Yes,
episode.
this is a very long episode.
Yes, but I'm not going to apologize because we had to cover your immense collection and try to capture as much wisdom as possible from you.
Well, hopefully I've provided some. So.
And we're going to play out the end of the episode with Nanon from which was one of my picks from 2024.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it.
because I was like, I really love this one. I want to play, like, to kind of see your progression through the years, but I want to play this one. So, but before we go, I want to kind of hear what other, like, wisdom or like what can you drop on us commoners that can help us with weekly beats or just music making in general?
Well, keep in mind I'm a commenter as well. So
You got the reps though. You got
I
the
got I put
reps.
the reps in. I mean that is the thing. I mean I didn't set out to do a particular thing for status. It was more that I kind of got in and kept swimming. Sort of the way it worked for me. So I think I would say is do something. If you're not, and if you don't like what you've produced, like if you say, oh, that's just a retread of this, or I don't have any ideas, that I think the moment where you say I don't have any ideas, people get dispirited by that, but I think that's actually the most valuable moment because that's when you're free.
Mm,
You're bored
I
with
love
all the
that.
stuff that you've done in the past. Now you're free of that. You don't have to
Yeah.
carry it around anymore. You could take a stick and rub it against a brick wall and record that. Make
Yeah.
make that the basis of your track. You know, uh,
Man, that is such wisdom because I feel like I had to work on this like mental shift of not feeling like anything was coming together and then trying to also work through that low point of like nothing's coming together and like go through the valley of despair and hope that something fun is going to happen. And then when I was like, oh, I should just have fun, things happened.
yeah, I think it's about having fun. It's about, I mean, like that valley of despair. There's two ways out of it. There's two approaches to getting out of it. One of them is, I mean, because there's multiple ways actually. One is to do what you have been doing, which is to kind of hang in there and see it through, and that is certainly a way through it. And you can end up with stuff that you're like that you're glad you produced. That this I got here, I weathered the storm, I got through this thing, you know, or you could also use that as a moment to kind of blow everything up and say, well, I'm gonna like, I'm gonna have two bars of rhythm and then take the drums out, and then I'm going to take this guitar line and reverse it, and
Yeah,
then I'm
just do
going
something that like you've never done before, off the
and
wall.
yeah, make an intuitive, capricious, just random out of the top off of the top of your head decision, and see where it leads, because it might, when you're not having fun with stuff, some of that is because, oh, I'm going over the same ground again and again and again,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I know where it leads and it's boring me. Well, then that's especially the time when you've got to say, well, what can I do to shake this up? Maybe this techno track doesn't have any drums at all. So take
Yeah.
all the drums out, or
Yeah.
maybe this like sample based rap thing, maybe drop the samples out, and then grab completely inappropriate samples, like oh, here's some shortwave radio broadcasts, here's my car's slipping belts, here's,
Yeah.
and put those in instead.
Very cool.
It's like there's I think is it don't believe the hype. There's this, um I think it's in Public Enemy's Don't Believe the Hype. There's a trumpet, a squealing trumpet that is actually a horse sample.
Oh,
It's
no
actually
way.
like a whinnying horse. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from doing anything really. I can't. I'm a semi, a, a semi competent, but more intuitive, like one-handed piano player. I'm not really a piano. I can't really play piano. I can kind of poke around a little bit with the right
Yeah,
hand,
I
and I
can
don't have
noodle.
any. I have zero left hand technique, but it's not a guitar. I don't understand it. But I could go, base something on keyboard. Like
Yeah.
to put myself in a position where my competence is at risk, or my competence isn't available, and so then everything is discovery.
Or and like you mentioned a while ago, taking these diversions and then still coming back to some of the similar stuff that you've been making, you can maybe drop some of the habits that you had and go a slightly different direction. It's like taking a music break while making different music. Yeah.
And maybe some of the last few years I've been alternating with the ambient stuff, and then the clean stuff is this kind of a constant cycle of break. But you
Mhm.
can, I'm looking for things to keep it fresh in a way. Um,
Awesome.
so I mean, I think that's, if I had some advice to give, it would be that if you're not having fun, then look for ways that you can, destabilize the thing you're working on.
Yeah.
And the act of making it come together, even with that brokenness or that strangeness, that's where the excitement comes from.
Yeah, and if you could put that stuff together, you can put anything together.
Yeah, I mean, put your drums through a distortion.
Uh,
Make everything. Take the wet signal out of the reverb, and
yeah.
get rid of the straight signal.
Shake things up.
Exactly.
Well,
Do
cool,
something
man.
unexpected. Surprise yourself.
I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been
Thank you for
super
taking the time.
cool chatting with someone that's got all the reps in. I feel like I could talk to you for another 2 hours. You are a fascinating person
Well,
with
thank you.
lots of hobbies, and you love to, like, chase the nuance and, like, go deep on stuff, which is
Well,
very
thank you.
cool.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'll have to. But maybe we can do another one in the future where I can get into some of the live performance stories.
Yeah, I mean, dude, there's no shortage of stories with you, so
That comes from being around for a while. That's the.
yeah. Well, thanks again,
Well, thank you very
and
much for taking the time. Thanks
yeah.
for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, glad to have you, and thanks everyone for listening, and thanks for putting up with a slightly different format, a little bit longer, but it's worth it. And we're gonna play it out with my favorite song from 2024, Nanon, and catch y'all later.
Thank you so much for listening.
All right, bye.